and for you to make some more Muslim friends. I know you have some Muslim friends, but you can never have too many. That's sort of my view. And I'm very honored to be co-moderating this with PBS anchor and correspondent Amna Nawaz, and give you the ground rules now.
Thank you so much, Dean. I'm very excited to be here as well, alongside one of my favorite people in the world, Dean, who will be carrying the comedic load for this evening. Not my strengths, I'm not going to lean into it. Here are the ground rules for the candidates. 90 seconds for introductory remarks at the top of this section. And then for each of our individual questions directed to each of you, you've got about 90 seconds or so to answer that as well. If we as moderators hear a direct line of attack or a line referencing the other candidate, in this case, it could get awkward because there are just the two of you, we will then be able to say, hey, candidate who was just referenced, would you like 30 seconds or 60 seconds to respond? And I'm sure we'll all keep it civil because you guys have done this before. So those are the ground rules. If you don't have any questions, I'm going to hand it back over to Dean, and he's going to kick off the questioning.
Sure. And by the way, in the second hour, there are 4 candidates. So Eric and Sean, if you want to take shots at those guys, they're not here to defend themselves. So now we'll do opening statements. Let's start first. We'll do it alphabetically. Brooklyn Borough President, Eric Adams.
And that's with 90 seconds or 60?
60 to 90. We have only 2 of you, so we have a little extra time.
Okay, because Sean knows I bring a stopwatch with me everywhere. I am so excited about the opportunity to just engage in this conversation, because I am not a new friend. I'm an old friend. And I think the question this community should be asking during this campaign is not so much what are the candidates going to do, but really, where were they? Islamophobia is not new. Where were they when we saw the countless number of young men being snatched away from their parents and put in the correctional facility on 3rd Avenue when I stood out front calling for their release? Or where were they when the police department was infiltrating their mosque and not allowing them to worship in peace? And I called out Raymond Kelly and others to tell them we could never do this to a community. Where were they when countless number of women from your community were being attacked because they wore a hijab, and I stood with them and fought with them to stop it? When Donald Trump called for the Muslim ban, and I had one of the largest demonstrations with some of you who are here now in front of Brooklyn Borough Hall. Where were they when we saw countless number of people who wanted to use 9/11 as an attempt to demonize your religion and your faith? I am not a new friend, I'm an old friend. And I did not discover you when I was running for mayor. I'm your brother and I know you.
Thank you. And now, Sean Donovan, who served in the Obama administration as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, as well as in the Bloomberg administration. So, Sean?
Dean, Amna, thank you for having me and making us feel so welcome. Assalamu alaikum. And Debbie, thank you for all your leadership, everything that you do. I became a public servant because I grew up in a different kind of crisis in this city. I am the grandson and son of immigrants. My grandfather was one of 10 poor Irish kids who grew up on the south side of London, and as a teenager got on a boat alone to West Africa and then to South America to try to make a living on the docks. My dad grew up in Costa Rica and Lima, Peru, and like so many in the Muslim community and our other immigrants around this city, came to New York to find opportunity, and he did. But around me, I also saw a very different New York. I saw homelessness exploding on our streets. I saw the South Bronx and so many communities burning to the ground, and it lit a fire in me to go to work on behalf of this city that I love. Started volunteering in a homeless shelter in college, came back right after school and started rebuilding those very same neighborhoods I'd seen burning as a child. And in the 30 years since then, I have led through crisis, whether it's when in the wake of 9/11, rebuilding our city as housing commissioner, as housing secretary in the worst housing crisis of our lifetimes. When Sandy hit our shores, President Obama asked me to lead the entire federal recovery effort. And then when Ebola and Zika threatened our country, working side by side with Dr. Fauci and all of our leaders across government to make sure it didn't become a pandemic that cost tens of thousands of New Yorkers their lives. I know what it means to lead through crisis, and I am uniquely prepared to be mayor at this moment.
Thank you. So the way we're going to break it down, myself and Amna are going to alternate on the topics. I happen to have the first topic, which is probably the top of everyone's mind, is the economic recovery. We're going through difficult times, and the Muslim community, nearly 50% of the bodegas are owned by Muslim Americans. It's been a struggle. I've written about it for the Daily Beast, talking to Debbie about it, interviewing some bodega owners. A big percentage of our community has taxi cabs and they have debt. Of course, Muslims are also doctors, lawyers, CEOs, and the whole gambit. It's a struggling time. So, President Adams, I want to start with you. You talk about in your plan on your website that we're going to have about 500,000 less jobs when the pandemic is over. Right now, we have over a 12% unemployment rate. We have children going to bed. We have record numbers of people going to food pantries. What would you do on day one to help New Yorkers who are in need right then?
Well, there's several things we need to do on day one. Number one, we need to ensure that the stimulus dollars that are coming to the city, they must go to assist those renters and small property landlords to make sure that we don't balance the budget on the backs of those who are in need. So we need to ensure that we don't have individuals who are renting, losing their homes, but also the greatest level of wealth in Black, Brown, and Muslim communities in their home ownership. So we must balance out to make sure that we receive to the landlords who own property to make sure day one we take care of that. Second, something that's important to your community, public safety. We must get gun violence under control. We have real gang violence in the city with a real saturation of guns in our city. I'm going to reinstitute the anti-crime unit as an anti-gun unit so we can do precision policing, not to harass innocent people, but to go after the real gun violence in the city. Third, we have to give support to our small business owners. And I see it through the procurement process. We spend about $22 billion a year on procurement. There's no reason we can't go to our small shops and stores that really hire 51% of our employees. Let's stop having our buying power used outside our city. Let's use it inside our city and really empower some of our small businesses.
Thank you. And Sean, you know, you talk about, you just had a plan in January you released, detailed plan, over 500,000 new jobs in various areas, including nightlife and stuff, which when I still do comedy, I'm very happy about that, bringing it back because we need that very much. Tourism. But again, it's a long-term plan. What would you say to the Muslim business owners who have bodegas and are taxi drivers with a lot of debt, and they're worried about being there in business literally tomorrow? And so when you start on day one, what would you do to help them?
Well, Dean, there is no recovery without restoring our health in this city. We have to end the pandemic, and we have to make sure that every single New Yorker can be vaccinated and that every single New Yorker knows that they are safe to move around this city. And so no one in this race has the deep relationships with President Biden, Vice President Harris, every leader across the federal government and in Congress. And I would go to work immediately making sure we get the fair share of vaccines that we need, and that we're partnering with the organizations, the trusted messengers in the Muslim community, in every community around this city, so that we're getting vaccines, we're getting the health and protection, and so that we're working to ensure there is the technology in place, contact tracing and testing, so that every time a New Yorker walks in to one of your small businesses, to a restaurant, gets in a taxi, that we know that it is safe, and that will attract New Yorkers and business. It will also attract tourists from across the world back to this city. So those are all key elements. But one of the things I want to focus on something that Eric said. It isn't just enough to get the federal resources. It's knowing how to deliver them directly where they touch the ground. And I want to be clear here. We have over $50 billion in rental assistance and other small business aid that can come to the city. It's based on a design of programs that I created in the wake of the Great Recession, working for President Obama. But I started my career working with small immigrant building owners in the South Bronx, in Central Brooklyn. And I know how to make sure that aid actually touches the people who need it most. And it comes through partnerships with exactly the organizations that are all sponsoring this forum tonight.
And Sean, one quick follow-up. You mentioned as mayor, you'll make sure we get our fair share of vaccines. Are you suggesting that right now we are not getting our fair share of vaccines?
Look, we were the hardest hit place in the world a year ago. Nobody in this country deserves, like New Yorkers do, to ensure that we're getting our fair share. And I don't believe we are at this moment. I believe, as with so many, look, I've spent enough years in Washington, D.C. to know that too often New York City goes without what we deserve. We send $23 billion more to Washington each year than we get back in services. That has to end, and we need a mayor who knows how to stop it.
And if I may be able to respond to that also, no, we're not getting our fair share. We treated this vaccine as it was an English-only speaking vaccine, and we communicated to those who read the New York Times and read the tabloids. We did not respect those who spoke Urdu, those who spoke Arabic, those who spoke Chinese and Korean. We communicated only to English speakers. And others, will have deep relationships to learn about navigating government. But let me tell you my deep relationships. It's the organizations that you represent. My relationship go back over 20 years of being involved with the people who are part of these organizations here. I know you didn't get your fair share, not because I read about it, because I spoke to your leaders. I was in your communities. I walked your block. I visited your mosque. I didn't go there merely to say that I support you. I was with you throughout this entire pandemic on the ground. We did not get our fair share because we didn't use technology to determine the proper distribution of the resources. And as mayor, that will never happen again because one of your own would be in City Hall.
And, to that very point, just quickly, when you see the people who are vaccinated in New York as of last week, it's skewed Manhattan and the Upper East Side, where I happen to live. And it shows you how the communication of this skewed to privilege. So last question here, we're doing one from the community for each person. So we have a question from the community. We're going to put it up on the screen, and I'll read it to you from Dr. Pervez Siddiqui. So this is Dr. Pervez Siddiqui's question. It's for Eric Adams. Share what you have seen in terms of economic pain in New York City caused by the pandemic. And as mayor, how would you address these needs?
Thank you. Number one, by using an organization like APNA, a powerful organization that's on the ground. I was with them throughout the pandemic, everything from women's shelters to providing food and support, communicating with on the ground. We made a big mistake by not utilizing those pre-existing organizations and groups during the entire census operation. We called on them to get information out for the census, but we didn't call on them to find out what was happening on the ground. And I told the mayor that we were making a mistake, both the mayor and the governor. So as we talk about using the PPP that's coming from Washington, the stimulus, we need to we can't do what we failed to do when the first round of stimulus came to this city. We went to rich corporations, they all did well. Bankers in this city looked after their friends instead of going on the ground at our small organization. I believe we need to build out our Chamber of Commerce, have them do the backroom work for many of our small organizations, put in place a local business, a banking network, and communicate with the organization and entities on the ground that understand the needs of their communities. We can make sure that we use these stimulus dollars correctly to salvage the economic hit on our community that has been disproportionate to Black, Brown, and other communities in the city.
Thank you. And Amna?
Thank you so much, Dean. All right, gentlemen, we're going to move on now to a new topic, and that is housing and affordable housing and the crisis of housing that we're all experiencing across the country. Sean Donovan, it feels unfair to start with you on this topic because you've got a little bit of experience here, but that's where we'll begin. And it is with a community question that I will begin this round of questions as well. So let's see if we can get that up on the screen. This is coming to us from Tawfiq Haroon from MFP, that is Muslims for Progress. He notes as well, you've got a little bit of experience here. You're unique in the field because, of course, you started off as a housing expert, housing commissioner in New York under Mayor Bloomberg, and later, of course, HUD secretary under President Obama. So as part of your plan, you've called for creating an additional 30,000 affordable housing units a year, plus $2 billion in funds to repair existing public housing units. You've also said the city needs billions in federal funds from Washington to meet the housing needs here. We're talking at a time of incredible crisis, right? It's not just New York City that needs these kinds of funds. So how would you plan on extracting those funds from the federal government?
Well, first, we've got to jump on this because in the last 2 months, Congress has passed almost $50 billion in rental assistance. It was designed based on a program I developed called Homeless Prevention and Rapid Rehousing in the wake of the recession. And it can be used flexibly if we know how to use it to keep people in their homes. That is the immediate crisis. We're on the verge of the greatest eviction crisis this city has seen in our lifetimes. And if we don't get that money out quickly, continue to have the eviction moratorium that I advocated for and worked with Congress to extend, we're going to have a crisis like we've never seen on our hands. So that's job one, is putting that money that we already have, that I know how to put to work, out to keep people in their homes. Second, we have to recognize that this is a moment where we have an opportunity to finally get the federal dollars we need to create more affordable housing, and particularly housing vouchers. What we know today is that if you're a family making $10,000 or $15,000 or $20,000 a year, you can't even afford to pay the operating expenses on an apartment, the heat, the utilities, and the maintenance. And so we must have rental assistance. I've worked with President Biden to create a plan so that every single eligible person would be able to get a voucher. We know right now that only 1 out of 4 New Yorkers that's actually eligible gets that assistance. We have to change that. And so that's the second big area where we should bring funds. The third is we have to recognize and have a mayor finally who understands that public housing is the single most precious housing resource we have in this city. More people live in public housing in New York than live in Atlanta, Georgia. We need $40 billion. I have a plan. I know how to put it together. I know how to go access those funds without any action from Congress. 30 billion of it would come from Washington, D.C., and the rest of it, I would put $2 billion a year of city capital and bring innovative partnerships to put solar on our roofs, to make public housing the most green, sustainable housing in the country. And that alone, we could raise private capital for another $6 billion that would lower the operating expenses and be able to raise capital against that would complete the $40 billion plan for public housing. So those are the 3 key ways we need to bring resources from Washington.
Eric Adams, let me bring you in here. And I'd love for you to just sort of respond to what you just heard, because I think one of the things a lot of voters out there are struggling with is figuring out where the differences are between the 2 candidates. So what about just what you've just heard and what you know of Sean Donovan's plan do you disagree with? What would you do differently?
First of all, I'm an expert on housing in this way. I was almost homeless as a child. I think sometimes we fail to understand what experts are. Experts are not only those who live inside the office spaces, but who have lived the tragedies that people are experiencing every day. And I think Sean's plan is an amazing plan, but I will go further. Number one, we need to look at what we have right now. We have SRO laws that are outdated. We need to change that. We need to lean into the direction of micro units to build smaller, change our zonings, to make sure that we can have affordable sites for people right now. We need to look at the large number of hotels in the outer boroughs that we can retrofit right now. It's cheaper to retrofit those hotels instead of building a new infrastructure right away. And we need to make sure we get people into these apartments, kitchenette-sized apartments right now. We need to legalize basement apartments. We can do that right now. All we need is the FDNY and the Department of Buildings to come together and get their acts together on addressing the problem. So we can do that right now. We could change our zoning right now. Right now we zone in upzone in poorer communities, displace poorer people, and leave affluent communities alone. I say let's upzone in affluent communities, good transportation, great schools, great access to healthy food, and bring poorer people into those communities. We can do that right now. So there's some great long-term plans, but there are things we can do right now to deal with this real high housing crisis. And let's keep people in their housing right now by giving them greater subsidies.
Thank you both for that. I hate to move on, but we do want to cover as many topics as we can. So I want to switch now to another big topic on everyone's minds, which is that of discrimination, specifically Islamophobia, and of course, this surge in anti-Asian hate that we've seen more recently and over the last year. So Sean Donovan, I'll begin with you. We saw where that trend and where the year of accumulating anti-Asian sentiment has led earlier this week in those horrific shootings in Atlanta. We see how easily communities of color can be dehumanized and targeted. And the Muslim community knows that well, particularly in the last 20 years since 9/11. You've talked about accountability. There's been a lot of focus on accountability to investigate, to prosecute hate crimes. But what is your plan to actually decrease those hate crimes and incidents from happening in the first place?
Well, Amna, first, I want to say thank you for raising this issue. And I particularly want to thank Debbie for opening this forum by recognizing the hateful violence that we saw in Atlanta. And look, I do think it's critical that we have real enforcement, that we hold people accountable. And I will say, as someone who 30 years ago met John Lewis, inspired by him, became friends with him and worked closely with him, one of the central reasons I went into housing is understanding that we separate people primarily through housing and neighborhoods. And we must have not just an enforcement strategy to stop the violence, but also to get to the underlying causes of inequity and what separates and victimizes people in our society. And so as the housing secretary, I was a leader on civil rights and fair housing. I took the lead not just on enforcement, but what's called affirmatively furthering fair housing. The steps that we need to take to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to succeed and to get ahead. Those are all critical. And we also need to have a mayor who will build bridges across communities. And I'm sure Eric will speak about it. I want to call out the great work he's done through the programs he's created to build connections across communities in Brooklyn, Breaking Bread, and other efforts. Those are the kinds of efforts that we need that get to the underlying understanding. Every single New Yorker should grow up in a community where they interact with, they connect with, and they build relationships with those who are different from them, including Muslims, and have to be taught in their schools true history of this country and of the world that allows them to understand that hatred should not be part of it, that we all share so many things in common that we must build those bridges.
So I hear you mentioning education, if I can just follow up briefly as something that can counter some of these things. But on the issue of breaking bread, I mean, one of the things we should point out is that a lot of these hate incidents and crimes are being carried out by people with white supremacist backgrounds. And I'm sure you're not saying we should be sitting down and breaking bread with them. But I guess the question is more to the point of how would you plan on countering that? We've just had a national security assessment from the intelligence community saying this is now the most lethal threat in America, is domestic violent extremism, people motivated by race and ethnicity. So how would you protect Muslim New Yorkers who are vulnerable to those?
So obviously this goes to enforcement, right? And it goes to partnering with law enforcement early on and making sure that we are creating true accountability. And again, one of the things that is unique about me in this race is the deep relationships I have with the Attorney General, with the incoming Homeland Security Secretary, Ali Mayorkas, who is a close friend and colleague, the ability to work collaboratively with our national law enforcement agencies who often have the best intelligence on these issues, and to be able to make sure that that enforcement is targeted. And again, balanced with making sure that we're building communities and building respect across, because we have seen that law enforcement can target in ways that also create the very problems that we're trying to eliminate.
Thank you for that, Sean. Eric Adams, if I can turn to you now. We heard Sean Donovan mention education as a core component of decreasing the bigotry, of teaching people their true history here in the States. There is this religious literacy curriculum that the National Social Studies Association has incorporated, and a number of other public school systems have implemented it. You mentioned on the questionnaire in advance of this forum that you don't support implementing that into New York public city schools. And I wonder if you could just explain why, and also answer some of these similar issues is in this growing tide of Islamophobia, anti-Asian American sentiment. How would you combat that?
Well, I think what you pointed out was extremely important, and what Sean stated about the foundation and underlying reasons. Number one, any major problem must be approached on 3 levels: short-term, mid-term, long-term. Short-term, we need to hold our social media giants accountable. We should not be allowing this hate on our social media platforms. We need to be clear about that. We need to have thorough investigations from the police department. Every person who was part of the attack of the Capitol needs to be sought out and arrested. And then we need to be extremely aggressive in our local law enforcement communities to identifying who is part of some of the hate groups in this city. We need to use the power of the federal government to do so. If they know how to go about doing this research, and it should be done. Second, long-term, it's about educating our children. That is what Breaking Bread, Building Bond is about. No, we're not going to stop that hate group from turning around, but we can stop feeding our babies with hatred and afraid of each other. 100 meals throughout the city, 10 people at each meal, all from different cultural and ethnic backgrounds, sitting down and talking to each other. We don't talk to each other as Americans. We want to pretend as though we don't have that hatred in us. We do, and we don't understand each other. And I want to break down those walls. We need to have cultural sensitive education. We need to lean into the different differences we have in our educational institution. Learn why someone wears a hijab, a kufi, a yarmulke. Learn why we pray several times a day. We're not doing that, and we're producing hate in our country in the process.
Thank you for that. Dean, turn it over to you now.
You're on mute, Steve, and we know it's hard to mute you. Dean.
Dean, you're still muted, bud.
Dean, you're muted.
I wish I had that power to mute him whenever I wanted. They won't give it
I
to
was
me.
muting to be so, but I'm saying you guys get along so well. It's kind of disappointing. We were really hoping for the fighting. So,
Dean, you were funny even while muted. That's an impressive talent.
Now, Sean, if I had a vote right now, it's going to be tough, Eric. So, Sean, so let's talk about an issue we saw in our streets of New York City and around the country last summer, and that was people rallying in favor of making our criminal justice system actually one that's just and not a criminal injustice system. And I want to start, we have a community question actually for Eric Adams. So can we put that up, and we'll start with that one first? And this is from Sarah Pervez, the American Pakistani Advocacy Group. And as Eric said, you served as a police officer for 22 years, rising to the rank of captain NYPD. You served in the state Senate for 2 terms. Now you've been your 2nd term as Brooklyn Borough President. What can you point to in terms of tangible changes you've made in policing and policing culture that ensure that the rights of all New Yorkers are protected equally?
Thank you for that. And it fascinates me sometimes when people say, wait a minute, this guy's a police officer. We can never elect a police officer. People don't really know my history. I was arrested as a child, 15 years old, beat bad by police officers. Civil rights activists came to me and asked me to join the police department to fight from within. I did not want to be a cop, but I knew we needed public safety and justice. And so I joined the police department, fought against stop and frisk, was a leading voice in the country about police reform. It didn't start when the Black Lives Matter marches took place. I was already engaged in this for 22 years while I was in the belly of the beast. And I used to have Muslim representatives and leaders call me when the police department was biased against them. They were happy to have someone inside that agency that fought for them. First, I testified in federal court to stop the stop and frisk, NYPD versus Floyd versus NYPD. The judge mentioned my name in her ruling when she ruled against the police department. Second, they were stopping, frisking young, innocent people in the city, keeping a database of Muslim young men and women. I was able to get that database destroyed by passing legislation with now Congressperson Hakeem Jeffries. I stopped the quota system. I was able to stop the surveillance of Muslims as they worship inside mosques. I was known to fight against the anti-Islamophobia senator his name is Greg Ball. You know, my advocacy around this issue is over 30 years. I did not just start this, I've been consistent.
And Sean, you worked with President Obama, but before that you worked with Mayor Bloomberg, Commissioner of Housing, 2004 to 2009. As you know, Mayor Bloomberg engaged in widespread surveillance of the Muslim community. We learned about it later, of course, from spying on where we prayed, to where we worked, to where we had fun. While you were in the administration, did you ever hear about that was going on? And if so, did you ever go to Mayor Bloomberg to discuss it?
So, Dean, I left to go work for President Obama at the end of 2008. It was just at that time that the lawsuit that Eric was talking about began to work its way through the courts. And I was not, as you said, I was housing commissioner. I was not involved in policing. Obviously, what happened was shameful. Mayor Bloomberg himself has said it was a mistake. Many of the policies that were pursued, and I agreed with that then. I agree with that now. But I'll tell you what I did do as housing commissioner, and after that, I began a landmark program where we gave our housing vouchers to folks coming out of Rikers. That was the time when the reentry policy under Mayor Giuliani before us was to drop people off from Rikers in the middle of the night on a street corner in Long Island City with a token. And I began giving my housing vouchers to folks coming out of Rikers. I took a lot of abuse for it because people said, why are you giving this precious resource to criminals? And after a year, Dean, the results were remarkable. 95% of those folks were stably housed, getting back to work, hadn't reoffended. It was so successful, it's now been replicated in 40 cities around the country. I will also say when I became budget director and had the chance of really getting involved in policing more directly, I stopped the giving of surplus military equipment to police forces around the country. I worked with mayors across the country as part of the 21st Century Policing Task Force to get rid of the 3 strikes rule in public housing so that people with criminal backgrounds could get decent housing across the country. I worked to get rid of the check the box, which stopped formerly justice-involved individuals from getting jobs. So I have a record that I'm proud of on these issues, even as I've worked on housing, where I've had the chance everywhere along the way. I haven't just talked about it, but I've actually made real change that made a difference in people's lives.
Thank you. If I'm permitted to, I just want to lean into this a little more, because many people are not aware of what was happening in the city under the former commissioner. And I was attacked. Many of the editorial boards, when I talked about it was wrong to go into the mosque and to do surveillance on innocent people, I was demonized and I was attacked. And when I talked about what was happening to the community after 9/11, many of the young people who are now advocates now don't really know what happened in this city after 9/11 and how we decimated innocent communities where Muslims live. I remember being in the basement on Coney Island Avenue with mothers who were in tears because their sons disappeared in the middle of the night and were put inside correctional facilities. We did to Muslims in this country what we did to innocent Japanese citizens during the war. It has never been completely told what has happened to the Muslims of this country. And I was there and I went through it with you, and we will never allow that to happen again.
Thank you, Ari. Amna?
Thank you, Dean. Gentlemen, I've got one question for each of you related to education, specifically to the provision of halal meals in New York City public school system. It's of interest to the community, and so I want to make sure we get that answer to them. Listen, about 10% of New York City public school population is Muslim, right? Every kid who goes to a New York City public school gets both Eid holidays off. That's how many Muslim kids are in New York City public schools. And the city has for years now passed legislation to provide kosher meals and halal meals to those students. That's a program already in place in neighboring New Jersey, in Michigan, in California. It's not yet all the way implemented in New York City public schools. So A, do you support the provision of halal meals to every kid who wants one in New York City public schools? And if so, what is your plan to make it happen? Eric Adams, we'll start with you.
Everyone knows me. They call me the food guy. Think about this. I cook for my family. I cooked them a meal. They ate it. They loved it. And then when they finished eating it, they finished consuming it. I said that was a vegan meal, and they said, "What? I didn't. What? Halal meal?
Are you vegan? Can we clarify? You are vegan?
Yes, I am.
Good for you.
Halal meal is good food. So if we have a community where overwhelmingly the number of children there are Muslims, and why can't we have all the food served there halal meals? We're making this a little bit more complicated than it is. The food in that school could be halal. It's not bad food for the children who are not Muslim. It's still good food and it's healthy food, but we should go further. We should make sure that we have authentic certifications, just as we do with kosher food. Anyone that's popping up saying they are halal certified should not have that right. There needs to be clear certification so that people know they're getting real halal food. And we should ensure that we stop treating our children as a one-size-fits-all. We're all unique. We need to allow prayer, allow our children to have a room in the school, to do everything from meditation to the call of prayer. Let's treat education differently and embrace our diversity and lean into an asset-based education where we can learn from each other, but yes to halal meals, and we can make it happen.
Thank you for that. Sean Donovan, same question to you.
Absolutely, yes. I'm not a vegan, but I absolutely agree with Eric on this question that we have to focus on delivering on this. And one of the things, if you look at my career, I obviously am a numbers guy. I oversaw the $4 trillion federal budget. And again, I've created real accountability through the HUD-STAT program that I created that dramatically reduced homelessness around the country and created real accountability. What I would do in one of my first acts as mayor is to create a chief equity officer position reporting directly to me with authority over every agency, who would have the responsibility to ensure that we're tracking issues like this, that really go to the fundamental root of, is every New Yorker able to get the services that are culturally appropriate and that really allow them to live lives of opportunity. And I want to say, it's not just in our schools. When a year ago, when I saw the COVID crisis coming on, I knew we were going to have 4-hour lines at soup kitchens because I've worked on crisis after crisis around the country. So what did I do? I went and raised over $1 million. I partnered with organizations that work with restaurants in the hardest hit neighborhoods. And we got those restaurants cooking culturally appropriate, including halal meals that could be delivered directly to people's doors using an app or calling in. And this was at a time that the Get Food program was serving not only poor quality food, but food that wasn't culturally appropriate, including the ability to really not just halal, but meet the needs and the desires of local communities, including the Muslim community. That's what I did while I was still campaigning for mayor. And those are the kinds of innovative solutions that I could bring. And guess what? I designed it so that FEMA could pay for it. And we could today, working with the Biden administration, with the right leadership in City Hall, get hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars into our restaurants, put people back to work. Dean, you asked earlier about how do we jumpstart our economic recovery? There's an idea, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars into our restaurants, including Muslim-owned restaurants in the hardest hit neighborhoods, serving emergency, hot, fresh, halal meals.
So I think you may have just lost the vegan vote, but I hear you both saying that you are committing to finding funding to make the halal food available for students, and that is our takeaway. I thank you for your answers, and Dean, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you.
I was never going to win the vegan vote. Just saying. I think Eric's got that locked up.
Unless there's vegan lamb, not happening. So, in any event, the last question. This is a short one, quick one. This is more about freedom of expression. I know it sounds like a foreign policy issue, but it truly isn't. It's about boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, which is a nonviolent movement about calling attention to the policies of the Netanyahu administration. In certain places like Texas, literally, if you don't certify that you won't be a part of this, you can't get a job in Texas. You can't even get a contract in Texas. As mayor, would you penalize people who want to be involved in BDS or any other kind of boycott movement? Start with you, Eric.
No, I won't. I think it's important that, this country, we lift up the right to protest. We lift up the right to call on our methods of voicing ourselves. Any way we do that, that is not harmful, that is non-violent, I think we should have a right to do so. I am criticized when I went to Turkey to visit those who were on a refugee camp on the border of Syria, because my Turkish residents asked me to go there to see that. I believe we have to be in a continuous place of communication and conversation, and we cannot in any way stymie the right to protest the right. This is what this country is about.
Sean, same question.
I mentioned a few moments ago that 30 years ago, I met John Lewis, and I was fundamentally inspired to get involved in housing and neighborhoods and issues of segregation. And where did that movement originate? In the fundamental right of all Americans to raise their voices, just as we saw last summer in our streets, as the Black Lives Movement emerged as a force and was celebrated by John Lewis. So absolutely, people need to be free to raise their voices. I want to be clear that anytime that veers into anti-Semitism or targeting on religious beliefs, that crosses the boundary for me. And that has to be a clear boundary, whatever religion we're talking about. But absolutely, I am for the ability to raise your voice in protest.
I strongly support what Sean just stated. We can't have Islamophobia. We can't have anti-Semitism, anti-Asian. I believe that you have a right to voice your concerns without in any way being harmful to each other.
Thank you. Amna, we want to thank you both. Amna, do you have some closing remarks you want to make?
I don't really. I think voters are probably more interested in hearing from these two gentlemen than me, but I just want to add my thanks to both of you for being here today, for taking the questions. Eric Adams, we'd love to know your vegan recipes, and you can share them with us online perhaps. But yeah, I think that wraps up our questions for both of you. I think at this point, we turn it over to Anika, if she is there and ready to join us. Anika Nawabi is joining us from MCN, and I believe will be delivering some remarks right now.
Yes, thank you and good evening, everyone. My name is Anika Nawabi. I'm the Executive Director at the Muslim Community Network. Eric, it's great to see you again. We just had a town hall with you last week.
Yes.
I just want to again thank you, Amna and Dean, for a wonderful moderation. This was very informative. We talked about issues that range from both, important issues that are important to the Muslim community, like halal food, religious diversity, education, BDS, to more larger issues that are still impacting the Muslim community and the larger non-Muslim community, like homelessness and vaccination access and criminal justice reform. These are all issues impacting New Yorkers overall, and Muslim New Yorkers, obviously. We have, we're here to listen to your leadership to see, how can we best decide on the candidate that works best for all of us. Also want to thank our community organizations, Apna Brooklyn Community Center, APHAG, as well as Muslims for Progress. Collectively, we serve tens and thousands of Muslim New Yorkers, as well as non-Muslims. We've been running food pantries over the course of the last year, and the amount of people who have come and taken up our services are great, and they're very diverse. So we are happy to bring your message Sean and Eric, to our communities and see where your priorities and such lie. I just want to make a quick announcement in the sense that we will be having another candidate forum comprising of all the Republican and independent candidates in a couple of weeks. So please stay tuned for that announcement and date. Right now, we're going to be transitioning off to our next part of the candidate forum, which includes candidates Andrew Yang, Scott Stringer, Catherine Garcia, and Ray Mcguire. So we do, Sean and Eric, you're more than welcome to stick around if you wish. Our attendees should stick around as we will be transitioning off to our next section here forth. Thank you so much again for your time, and we're really, really grateful for your participation in tonight's panel.
Thank you. Thank you for your work. Take care.
I'd love to stay another forum starting immediately now. So, assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for having us.
Well, thank you.
So I want to thank all of you who've tuned in and who are going to continue tuning in. As Anika just mentioned, we are now up for session 2. Again, I want to do an introduction for those who are just coming in for session 2. My name is Dr. Debbie Almantasser. I am the senior advisor at Engage New York. On behalf of the 10 organizations based in New York City, I'd like to welcome you to our first of 2 candidate forums. Engage Metro New York is proud to have partnered with the following organizations that are comprised of 501c3s, as well as C4 groups: the Pakistani American Public Affairs Committee, American Pakistani Advocacy Group, APNA Brooklyn Community Center, Brooklyn Emerge, MUPPIES, the Shia Council, the Shia Muslim Council of New York, the Muslim Community Network, Muslims for Progress, and the Yemeni American Merchants Association. Before I go further, I want to take this moment to acknowledge the pain and suffering of our Asian American Pacific Islander community with the horrific incident that just happened a couple of days ago in Atlanta. We stand in solidarity with you, we pray for you, and we are there with you shoulder to shoulder to combat hate, bias, and discrimination and violence against your community. As an American Muslim and as American Muslims who are here tonight, we stand in solidarity with you and thank you for all of the incredible work that you are doing on behalf of all of your neighbors. Back to this forum, I want to acknowledge our 2 moderators, Dean Obeidallah and Amna Nawaz. Thank you so much for being here tonight and for actually doing an incredible job on session 1. And now you're going to be starting session 2. I want to kick it off by simply saying we are so proud to be a part of this movement and engaging 350,000 registered Muslim active voters in New York City to make a difference this election cycle. As many of you know, back in 2017, it only took 450,000 votes to decide who the next mayor was. And we are sure with our partners to make sure to turn out this number. This number may be small, but you should also know that right here in New York City, 22% of US Muslims actually reside right here in New York City, according to a recent study by ISPU. So we come from different ethnic, racial, and religious backgrounds and various professions. And most importantly, we are New Yorkers and we take New York serious, and we will make sure to be out in the street and at the ballot box. So I will turn it now to our moderators who will introduce the candidates and do their thing. So take it away, Amna and Dean. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Debbie,
very
thank
much.
you so much for that introduction. Welcome to everyone. Hi, I'm Amna Nawaz. I'm an anchor and correspondent with the PBS NewsHour. I am very excited to be here tonight for this second session in our mayoral forum, and I'm more than anything excited to be here and doing this alongside my friend and colleague, Dean Obeidallah. So Dean, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. So I've been told we should wait 2 minutes because all the candidates are not here yet. So we have Ray Mcguire here, I see, but we're waiting for the other ones and they'll pop up and then we'll start there. Unless we just do one-on-one with Ray Mcguire. That's it. Just Ray, just chat with us and we'll go from that way. But we want to welcome everyone who is here. And generally it's the Muslims who are.
Oh, Dean, you muted yourself again. The fun of Zoom forums.
No, they're muting me. It's accidental. So they just want me to stop talking, I think, at this point. So we'll wait 1 minute, and as soon as all the candidates are here, because it's actually before 8 o'clock. I didn't even realize this is actually pre 8 o'clock right now. So
And be on time, be early.
yes, and thank you for being early. So
I thought I went over time, so forgive me that I didn't give you guys a great introduction, Amna and Dean.
no, that's fine. We'll wait for everyone. And now, Andrew, welcome.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you.
Hello.
We're waiting for the other two candidates, and we'll start right away. But thank you for being here.
Dean, something has changed about you, and what is it?
It's I've grown since I last saw you. I don't know.
You seem like more clean shaven, shorter haircut. There's something going on.
What's going on with you, Dean?
Andrew was on my radio show when he was first running for president. I may have been one of his first people to interview him. And so he remembers it from then. I was haggard, but I don't know. Maybe quarantine agrees with me. I can't tell you.
You look sharp, man. It would have taken me a minute, for sure.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for being here. Today, we'll have the other two candidates and we'll start again. We'll do a little intro again. And thanks everyone for joining us as well and for staying from the first panel to the second watching.
Hi, Amna. How are you?
Hey, Andrew, how are you? It's nice to see you again.
Good to see you too. Yeah, it's great to be here.
It's been a while. I don't think we've seen each other since the LA debate, which was a lifetime ago now.
Doesn't it feel like it? I can't believe that was only 15, 16 months ago. But I guess it's like the longest 16 months in our lives and history.
Yeah. Little did we know how much things would change very soon after.
Yeah, it's incredible. Hopefully it'll change in reverse. Hopefully this vaccine will. Has anyone been vaccinated? Not me. Still hoping.
I'm almost eligible. I'm getting there.
Eligibility will come to you, my friend.
I hope so. I will gladly get it. And there are people in different communities who have concerns about it. And as soon as I get it, I will gladly tell everybody that I got it. And if it makes any difference in helping people. Right, so
I consider the same thing, Dean. I was like, hey, can I have it if I try and spread the word about it? Like thinking, am I cool enough? But even that seems self-serving. And so then you're just like, I'll wait in line.
And here's
Okay, I believe that Scott Stringer is here. I'm just gonna, again, welcome everybody. My name is Dr. Debbie Almentasser. I am the Senior Advisor for Engage New York Metro. Thank you all for joining us. I will not do the reintroduction again. You just have to watch the video again and learn about all the 10 organizations that formed this coalition to put this mayoral candidates forum together. So Dean and Amna, do your thing.
Okay, here we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to session 2. My name is Amna Nawaz. I'm an anchor and correspondent with the PBS NewsHour. We are very excited to be putting the questions to the mayoral candidates to make sure that everyone out there has the information to feel informed and empowered before casting their ballot. We've got some ground rules we want to set for the candidates, so I'm going to hand it over to Dean.
So there's simple ground rules. We're actually waiting for one more candidate, I believe Catherine Garcia, but each person gets an open, about 90 seconds. Please try to keep it within that. And then we will ask questions, same thing, 90 seconds. If you attack each other, which we hope you do, I'm kidding, of course, we hope you don't, that we'd rather you fight for the Muslims and New Yorkers than fight each other, to be blunt. But if you invoke each other, we might call on you again for 30 seconds. But we'll have various buckets of core issues that Amna and I will alternate in terms of asking you questions about them. Amna?
Thank you, Dean. So we'd love to give each of you the opportunity to briefly state your case. We're just getting word now that Catherine Garcia is going to be joining us a little bit later, so we'll give her the opportunity to deliver those remarks when she joins us. Let's just each of you, if you don't mind, take a minute or two, say what you'd like to say, introduce yourself to any folks watching out there. And Andrew Yang, we'll begin with you.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Amna. It's so great to be here with everyone. Our city is in the midst of a devastating crisis, and the question is, how will we get out of it? Will we get out of it? I'm a numbers guy, as some of you may know. We are down 600,000 jobs, thousands of small businesses, and we know that the Muslim community is extraordinarily entrepreneurial and enterprising, and are the owners and operators of many of these small businesses. We're down 60 million tourists, 82% of commuters, 70% of subway ridership. Violence is rising in our city, anti-Asian violence, and there's been a tough week on that front, is up 900% documented. These aren't political problems so much as they are wounds that have been wrought by the coronavirus. And the question is, who is going to be able to speed up our recovery and activate the resources, not just in city government, so that it frankly gets out of the way to a higher degree, but also the philanthropic sector, the corporate sector, even the technology sector, in order for us to have the tools for us to have New York City recover in the way we want it to. I believe that I can speed up our recovery faster than anyone else in the field. I have the relationships in DC and the know-how, not just in the public sector, but in the private sector, to get our city back the way that we remember it.
Thank you for that. Ray Mcguire, thank you so much for being here. I'll turn it over now to you for introductory remarks.
Thank you so much for having me. I would like to just observe that I've had a long-standing relationship with the community. I come from a community not dissimilar. I grew up in Ohio, in Dayton, Ohio, raised by my single mother, who, along with my grandparents, raised me and my two brothers, and we had half a dozen foster children in our home at any one point in time. I didn't know my dad, and based on my mother's sacrifices, I came east to get an education. I was able to do that by going to Harvard College, then law school and business school. And I came to this city and I had a lot of debt. I had a great education. I had no money. And New York City has been great to me. It's a city that I love, but today it is facing a crisis of COVID, a crisis of the economy, a crisis of racial and religious hatred, and a crisis of the climate. The disproportionate impact of all of these, which existed before COVID, has been on this community. And I have the lived experiences. I have the experiences in business where I started and there was no one who looked like me for the most part, where I have broken down the doors and made certain that Black and brown people and people of all races and religions were able to come behind me, made certain that they got the opportunity to get trained and get promoted and get compensated in the communities where I have been involved, to make certain that I develop those relationships and also have leadership. I've managed budgets larger than most state budgets. I've managed through crises. I've developed relationships across the spectrum. As I say, I know the language of the streets and the suites, as my Latino brother would say, from the patio to the boardroom. I have a vision for this city that is inclusive, the greatest, most inclusive economic comeback in the city, safety and justice, and education. It's on those three pillars that my vision of the city is based. And I come to this because I love the city. I've not served in public. I have not served in any administration. I have not gotten termed out. I'm not looking for a promotion. I'm here with the sole interest of making certain that this city, as it is designed as the greatest city that exists anywhere, is the most inclusive. And my economic comeback plan is the greatest, most inclusive economic comeback plan that exists, which by design, this community will get included. And we'll make certain that it has the opportunities that are necessary for it to thrive the way it should thrive. And so I come to you as someone who's got your best interests at heart, which is my sole focus. So thanks for having me, and thanks for my long-standing relationships with the community.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for those remarks. Scott Stringer, welcome to you. Thank you so much for being here. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you for having me, and it's great to be with Engage. And just want to say hi to Dr. Debbie and so many others who are on tonight. Look, this city is facing three crises at the same time. We have an economic crisis, a public health crisis, and a social justice crisis. And we cannot reopen the city the same way we closed it. And I'm running for mayor because I have the vision, the skills, and the actionable plans to take on the inequities that we have seen as this pandemic has laid bare. We've got to take our city forward. And I believe that experience is going to matter this time in the mayor's office. I've been a state assemblyman. I've worked in Albany. I know we have to reset that relationship. I served as borough president, went to community-based planning to get the big projects done, working with communities. And as controller, I've been the chief financial officer of the city. I've managed a $240 billion pension fund, the fourth largest in America, 14th largest in the world. Not only did we protect the retirement security, 100,000 city workers, I have been on the front lines with all of you to advance justice in our city. You know that when I talked about taxi medallion debt relief, I worked with the community and made sure that we had a plan that's going to work. I fought to restore municipal voting rights for immigrants, to stand up against the Muslim and African bans, to stand up against hate, and to create halal and kosher school lunch pilots. We work together on that issue so our kids have healthy, nutritious options. Look, together, we're going to bring these fights from the steps of City Hall inside City Hall. We cannot afford a mayor on training wheels. This is going to take real government experience to build coalitions in Albany, in Washington, but also in the city council. And nobody has that kind of experience. But I'm also a lifelong New Yorker, and I love this city. And I'm raising my two little boys here, a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old. I got married late in life. And I believe very much that for all of our work, it's about the kids. So I look forward to this discussion. The Muslim community is very special and very special to me. We have a long-standing relationship working on issues. I'm not new to the community, and I'm certainly not new to people on this call tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you to all of you for being here. To our audience, a couple of quick notes. If you were expecting Catherine Garcia to join us, she will be joining us just a little bit later, so she'll join us in progress. Dean and I are going to be kind of ping-ponging back and forth across a few different topics. I'm going to hand it over to him to kick us off with the questions.
Thank you very much. Again, thank you for being here tonight so that the Muslim community can meet you and then you can make some new Muslim friends. Because you never have too many Muslim friends is sort of my mantra. We're going to talk about the economy now for the next couple of questions. I want to start with a community question. It's for Comptroller Scott Stringer. So let's put that up on the screen. It's by Syed Ali Hassan from the Shia Muslim Council of New York. He writes, Scott, you have pledged to bring our economy back with a focus on supporting small businesses, putting New Yorkers back to work and training them for jobs of tomorrow. But how do you ensure that communities of color will get a fair shot at these opportunities?
Well, that's an important question. And, you know, under my small business plan, it is geared to making sure that we help a lot of our immigrant businesses. Because let's face it, Wall Street made a bundle during the pandemic. The Trump stimulus package benefited the richest people in the city and this country, and $38 billion in profits were made. How that happened is just unbelievable. But here's what also happened. We lost 2,800 small businesses that employ 50 people or less. Many of our local retail spaces owned by immigrant communities, including the Muslim community, is literally hanging by a thread. So here's a couple of quick things. One, we must ensure that we give tax breaks to the businesses that are hanging on. We're also going to have to incentivize new businesses to come into what are now vacant commercial corridors in so much of our city. And we have to think about how we retrain or give workforce development training to people who lost their jobs, many and mostly in communities of color, not on Wall Street, but in communities of color. And the way to do that, in my plan, is let's make 2-year CUNY college free. Let's create a workforce development plan that can upskill the workforce. You know, a lot of people don't even need a 2-year college degree or 4-year college degree to get back into the workforce. Micro-credentialing in IT, in engineering, all of these different disciplines can be accomplished relatively quickly. With wraparound services, I believe we can meet the needs of so many of our diverse communities. Everybody here knows my work on making sure that we have reforming the procurement contracts in city government with MWBs. I've been the thought leader nationally and locally in making sure more women and people of color get city contracts. I have a chief diversity officer in my office. We need to do that in every city agency. So there's a lot that I want to do to empower the communities that have been left out of the pandemic financial surge, so to speak.
Thank you, Scott. Ray, you have a remarkable career and a truly remarkable life as you went through here. Remarkable career on Wall Street. But what do you say to the 50% of bodegas owned by Muslim Americans who are barely making ends meet? Some of them have closed. To the taxi drivers, where they're brought down by debt. Yes, there are Muslims who are lawyers and doctors and CEOs, but the ones who've struggled the most are those on the front lines doing those careers. How can you tell them you can relate to their experience, being that you've been on Wall Street, successfully, of course, but for all these decades?
So a great question. Let me address how I can relate, because I know what it's like not to have. Notwithstanding what I've done, you need to take a look at who I am, which I tried to kind of outline from the outset. My life growing up and what is my foundation is a life where we had little to no money. I can remember my mother debating whether or not she would pay the gas and electric bill, or whether or not she would put food on the table, or pay the rent, or pay tithes and offering in the church. I know what it's like to wash tin foil. I know what it's like to put those little bars of soap together at the end to convince yourself that you have a full bar of soap. So for those who have been the most disconnected, the most marginalized, I am that community. That is my foundation. And notwithstanding what I've been able to accomplish, and why I love this city so much, because it gave me the opportunity, I look at that foundation and I look at the point from which I started, which I've never forgotten. And I look at what I've been able to do while I have been in business, while I have knocked down doors and made certain that others had the training, had the opportunity, so that they could get promoted, so they could get compensated, including this community. I ran a global business. And so I made certain that I attracted and identified the best talent. So I would say, I wouldn't direct you to a press release. I direct you to the facts, for which I have receipts. So if there's anybody in this race to whom the community can look at the track record, which is verifiable around the country and around the globe, it's me. So I welcome the question. Thank you. I should also talk about at some point what's in my plan to make certain that this community, when it comes to MWBEs, which is part of my plan of go big, go small, is included. And also I take a look at the people who've described what they've done in while they've been in government, in the de minimis amount, I'm being generous, the de minimis amount of procurement contracts that this community has received under this administration, or quite candidly, under most administrations, which will change under my administration based on my track record. I got receipts.
Thank you, Ray. Andrew, of course, you're known for universal basic income, that the government took your plan and have done it. Now for New York, you're proposing, they really did it. It was all you. You were trending on Twitter when they first talked about stimulus plans, as you probably recall.
You helped make it happen, Dean. You had me on before it was cool, so I appreciate it.
I was very intrigued by UBI. Now for New York, you're proposing, last I've seen, about 500,000 New Yorkers would get universal basic income. That's about 8% of New Yorkers. From what I'm seeing, about 32% of adults reported going to food pantries. Of New Yorkers. That's a huge increase. That's a 200% increase. What are you going to do for the rest of New Yorkers on day one who don't qualify for UBI, but their kids are going to bed hungry? They're worried about being evicted tomorrow. They're losing their job, foreclosed on their medallion or their bodega. What would you do for the others who don't qualify for that, but still need help?
Well, first of those specific issues, I'm for a plan to frankly bail out medallion owners at a certain level into six figures. I thought that de Blasio's plan on that front was terrible. Like, who did he talk to about that recent plan? And for bodega owners, what we have to do is we have to have businesses be able to operate and get relief to the landlords. If you look at who's going to be more able to access relief, it's going to be the landlord 99 times out of 100. And so the bodega should be able to operate if they can get any level of business free of concern. I want to be the anti-poverty mayor, and I think most people know that if I had my druthers, we'd all be getting $1,000 a month plus. But here in New York City, we do have to be strategic about how we can improve people's lives. So as you suggested, I've committed $1 billion to alleviate extreme poverty among the 500,000 poorest New Yorkers. And we're going to get a lot of that money back because we're spending over $2 billion on homelessness services right now. And if you keep people in more secure, stable situations, it's actually a fantastic use of resources. But you're right, that's not going to touch a lot of the need. I want to expand financial services. We're going to have a people's bank that I've committed 100 million to that's going to augment the resources that are available to community development financial institutions to be able to get more money into Black and brown communities that right now are going to get overlooked by the major banks. To the direct question of food relief, it's been heartbreaking. I've been to half a dozen food pantries over the last number of days, but I was inspired by one organization that has started something called a digital food pantry. And what the heck is that? A digital food pantry is a way that folks can essentially pick which foods they want, and it gets delivered to them. They have like a point system. Some of the healthy foods actually are lower points. And this is tremendous because a lot of people, frankly, should not be waiting outside in these food pantry lines for, in some cases, hours, because a lot of them are older and infirm. So the fact that this nonprofit has done this is exactly the kind of thing that our city government has to augment and amplify and get the resources. So it's not just that one or two digital food pantries, it's dozens of them.
Can I ask a question on this? Just one question for clarification.
Sure, right.
On this UBI, I just read an article recently that says that those people who receive UBI are going to give up more than they receive. How do we respond to that?
Well, at the level that I'm proposing this cash relief, Ray, it's not going to interfere with any existing benefits. You're looking at a population in extreme poverty. They're well below any of the thresholds that would, frankly, affect current benefits. And a lot of that population is going to be undocumented. It's actually going to be very difficult even to be able to get them connected to be able to give them money. Like, giving money is harder than it looks. Like, I've done it a few times. So we're going to have to build up their adoption of IDNYC and then get them bank accounts even to be able to put any money into their hands. It's not going to affect current benefits.
Can I just put in my
Quickly,
my 2 cents as well? Look, UBI nationally and stimulus money is certainly critical, but as controller and as the money guy, I've crunched the numbers on my friend Andrew's plan, and basically, when you think about the people below the poverty level, that $1 billion, which he says he's going to raise privately, I don't know how, but that comes out to about $5 a day.
75 and 78 cents, $5.78.
Okay, that's a Citibank number. I say $5, but here's what happens.
I'll go with the controller. You're right. I have no idea how you pay for it. I don't know how undocumented it gets.
Your point is a quick question.
Let me just finish my point if I can.
Sure.
It's $5 a day. You can't buy a Subway sandwich special for $5. And what we have to think about is not just the glitz of what it is, but we have to recognize that we have to invest in the things that are going to make fundamental change, like real affordable housing, like real education opportunities. And I would say that UBI local plan is just not going to get us through a pandemic because it's so little money. It sort of covers up the systemic crisis we have financially. And I know this as the city controller.
Well, Scott, I would beg to differ from the people that actually, frankly, right now listening to this, where $200, $300 a month would be a game changer. It might be the difference between keeping a roof over their head or not, being able to make a choice between feeding their family or not. So it's easy for you to say, oh, like a few $100 a month is trivial, but to hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers, it would be very significant.
Actually, it's not hundreds of dollars a month. It actually comes to very little money. It's a big promise. You don't have a plan to pay for it. And the reality is $5 a day is not the challenge here. We've got to give people a real job.
Thank you very much. I love the robust conversation. Amna?
This is a little different than we're used to, so it's
fun.
We welcome it. We welcome it. We want to be able to show the voters out there where you guys are alike, where you are different. That's how they're going to make their decisions. But I do want to move on to another topic that Scott Stringer, you just raised. I will start with you on this topic. That is affordable housing. There's a critical housing shortage in New York City. Of course, the pandemic has pushed many more New Yorkers to the brink of eviction. You're a former housing organizer, right? Housing justice is central to your plan. You've laid out a 27-point plan. Part of it ending tax abatements. You want to reinvest in affordable units. You want to require every new residential development in every neighborhood to set aside 25% of all units for affordable housing. Not surprising, developers don't like it because they say it shifts more risk to them, right? It strips away some incentives, and they think that a lot of them will end up just picking up and leaving. So I just want to ask you to respond to that criticism and tell this community how your plan helps them.
Well, this plan, and I really appreciate you reading it. This plan is not a gimmick. This plan addresses the dire crisis that we face. And that, again, is 500,000 people on the brink of homelessness. That was before the pandemic. 60,000 people, half of them children, are sleeping in a homeless shelter tonight. My housing plan does a couple of things. First and foremost, I believe we should access the city-owned property the city actually owns. We, the people, own this land, rather than give it to luxury developers to build housing that is mostly luxury, and the small affordable housing component is actually unaffordable to people in our neighborhoods. I want to give that land back to community-based organizations. This has been the great tradition of mayors in our city over the past many decades. I believe we can build through this plan with a redirected subsidy the affordable low-income housing we need to address the crisis in our homeless shelters. We have to build affordable housing that's low income, but we also have to build supportive housing. And when we talk the good game on integration, it's time that we integrate as it relates to housing and zoning. And I do think that as we build new construction, it's reasonable in a housing emergency to set aside 25% of those developments for affordable housing and make sure we work with the development community to make that happen. If we don't do this, and we have another mayoral administration that plays the game back and forth with the city council, where you get to build 40 stories in a neighborhood, and then you build a commitment of 50 affordable housing units that never even get built. This is how the city collapses. If we're really going to be a mayoral administration that's going to end up the status quo, take the politics out of land use and zoning, I would ask you to consider this plan. It's not the only idea out there, but I have thought about this for a long time as a housing organizer, as someone who is a pro-tenant legislator in Albany. And look, I did land use and zoning when I was borough president. So I have the skills, and as Ray says, I got some receipts too on how to get this done.
A lot of receipts floating out there. Scott Stringer, thank you for that. Ray Mcguire, I want to bring you in here because you have also pointed to the need, obviously, for more affordable housing to be built. You recently were quoted in an interview saying people shouldn't have to pay 60 to 70% of their income on rent. You also said if the city's going to work, we all have to contribute, including the developers. So you heard what Scott Stringer is going to ask of the developers. What specifically would you ask of the developers?
So let's take a look at this, and I will say, and the other, what we need to do is to build truly affordable housing. 43 to 45% of New Yorkers today are rent burdened, which means they pay the percentage that I've outlined in income in their rent. That is not deeply affordable housing. When New York City was building, we built 2.2 units of housing for every private sector job, every new private sector job. Today, we build 0.5 units of housing, which means that the demand has so exceeded the supply that the price has gone up. We need to build deeply affordable housing, which is below 50% of what they call the area median income, which is set by the federal government, and today based in Westchester County. What that means is we need to build houses that people who make $30,000 to $40,000, $50,000 at the high end can afford. These are our front end workers. These are the people who are the essential workers. They make the city go. It will cost us $1 billion to build 5,300 deeply affordable housing homes. That translates into thousands of jobs, and the multiplier, the economic impact of that is probably $2 to $2.5 billion worth of economic activity. We need to make certain that we do this with the not-for-profits and with the government. We have the capacity to begin today to build deeply affordable housing, and that's part of my overall plan. And can we get the developers in? We can get the developers interested in where we have built the most housing for the past few years, the past 8 years or so, is in the 50 to 80,000 workforce housing. So let's move people in from the shelters into deeply affordable housing, and let's give them the opportunity to go from deeply affordable housing into home ownership, which is the plan. And ultimately, that's the goal for us to make sure that we realize the promise of this great city. And that's my plan, to make certain that we build deeply affordable so that all of our citizens can participate.
But specifically to what you would ask from developers, when you see something like Scott Stringer's plan of every new residential development has to have at least 25% affordable housing units, is that something you support, or do you have
I think I support mixed use. So we need to make certain we can't force people into doing anything that exists with private capital. I would incentivize by making certain we have some mixed use in that as well. So I don't disagree with the approach. I would modify it a bit to include it to make certain that we have deeply affordable in there as well. And the other part to this is we need to make certain that when we have air rights with the faith-based community, that we incentivize the development there, but let it be done with the proper protections, because today too many of our faith-based leaders are being taken advantage of, and we need to stop that. We do need to build. We need to be inclusive in how we build, and we need to be inclusive in who builds what. So I would make certain the incentives existed, but I would make certain that the government and the not-for-profit sector took the lead and move forward.
Thank you for that. Andrew Yang, I'd love to bring you in here. One of the things we want to make sure people walk away with is how plans are different and how they are the same. What did you disagree with that you just heard?
I think that they're taking for granted that developers think that there's a ton of money to be made developing new apartment stock in a city where you have double-digit vacancy rates in existing buildings. 80% of hotel rooms are unoccupied. 82% of commercial real estate in Midtown and Times Square are unoccupied. And they're talking about new construction that will best case take years and years to come online, even if the incentives worked in a city where, frankly, property developers are not chomping at the bit to double down. What we should be doing is we should be converting these hotel structures into affordable housing. You can do it at half the cost and in half the time. And right now there are nonprofit developers trying to do just this. I talked to one who has a bid in for an empty hotel, and I asked them, hey, if I'm the mayor, how can I help you? And they said, what you need to do is you need to provide 20 to 25% of my bid as a forgivable grant, and then you'll be able to develop this housing, and we can see it around us. Like, the fact is, if you look around New York City right now, it does not give you a great feeling because many of these buildings are empty. So which plan sounds more reasonable to you? Take the existing structures and convert some of them into affordable housing that we've needed for years. And by the way, avoid some of the political food fights, or wait several years for developer incentives that take for granted an economic climate that does not exist right now.
So let me,
First of all,
Hang on just one second, gentlemen,
I-
just 1 second before we all jump in here. I'm going to give each of you 30 seconds to respond, and then we have to move on. Scott Stringer, go ahead.
First of all, we have thousands of vacant parcels of land that we can give to community-based organizations right now to build that housing. What Andrew's talking about is incrementalism. Most of those hotels are going to come back as hotels, and I can show you the data from our office about the rebound of the economy. And so, yes, I agree, we can use some of those hotels, but it's not going to make a dent in the housing crisis. And we need a mayor who's going to transform housing, not maintain incrementalism development projects. And I think respectfully, it's just not big and bold enough. And that's what the city needs right now.
Thank you for that. Ray Mcguire, 30
Yeah,
seconds.
I think it's headline grabbing, and it's not substantive, nor is it large enough. The other component of this, if you look at the economics, these places are going to be bought at market rates. These places are not going to be discounted. So the fact that someone is looking for a
Ray, would you buy a hotel at market rates right now?
Well, would they sell it at you know, who's going to sell it? You got to have the sellers who are prepared to sell it
Just
at below
trust me
market
when I
rate.
say that right now they're looking around and the market rate is changing very, very quickly.
It may be, Andrew, but you know, you don't have a big enough market. You don't have enough people prepared to sell at below market for that to happen. Scott's right. It's incremental. It's headline grabbing, but it's incremental. It is all of that. Yes, we need to convert where we need to convert, but it ain't going to be big enough.
Okay,
It helps.
thank you for
It
that.
helps, but it is incremental.
We're going to have to leave that part of the discussion there. I encourage folks to go to your websites and talk to your teams if they want more information on that. There is another topic of enormous interest to our community that I want to get each of you to weigh in on, and that is, of course, discrimination and the growing Islamophobia we've seen in this country, and of course, the growing sentiment of anti-Asian American sentiment over this last year. So as we sit here and speak, we're closing in at the end of a week that we saw a horrific attack in Atlanta, a mass shooting disproportionately targeting Asian women. We've seen the trend, the increase of anti-Asian sentiment over the last year, and we saw how quickly that dehumanization can translate into violence here in America, and that is something the Muslim community knows very, very well. So I'd love just for each of you to weigh in a little bit to tell us how you would decrease those hate crimes and hate incidents against vulnerable communities in New York City. I'm not talking about accountability on the back end after things happen. I'm talking about how you stop it before it happens. Andrew Yang, I'll let you go first.
Thank you, Amna. It's been a heartbreaking, devastating time for so many people. And I remember in the early 2000s, I was working with a Muslim friend, Fahad Ahmed, and he came back from a personal trip, and he came back several days late. And then days later, he told me that it was because he'd been detained at the airport in Michigan for no other reason that he was Muslim and had a Muslim name. And they held him for a day, and he thought he was never going to see his family again. And I heard this story, and this is an educated college graduate Muslim, working in a company in New York, and this was pretty soon after 9/11, and it shocked me that this is the way that we treat someone who is, as American as anyone. Now with the Asian hate crime environment, Asian hate crimes are up 900%, and that's just what we know about. I think it's far worse because frankly, many Asian Americans will never report or come forward. So you're asking the exact right question is, how do we decrease these incidents before the fact? And you use the right word, which is dehumanization. I think that the perception of Asian Americans, I grew up Asian American in this country, and I was talking to my wife about it earlier today. And I grew up with a sense of invisibility, but now I feel visible, but in a very, very dark way. Like I feel visible in a way that actually generates animosity and hostility. And that's what many Asian Americans are feeling right now. So the antidote is for people to come together. And one of the advantages we have in New York City, the most diverse city in the world, is that we can bring our high school students together to frankly sit down with people of different backgrounds and experience each other as human beings, and be able to see someone who they would not consider someone that they might run into on the street, but just be able to sit down. This is something that we can do. I was inspired by a program that, and this is a different context, this was around like Holocaust survivors. They brought a Holocaust survivor to FDR High School, and they heard about their experiences. We can do that with the Muslim community. We can do that with the Asian American community. We can do that with the Black and Latino community. Let's take advantage of our diversity and expose our children to different ways of life, different cultures, different languages, so that if you see someone on the subway who looks different from you, you will regard them as just as human as you or your family.
Thank you for that. Ray Mcguire, over to you.